What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with a solo podcast, the first solo podcast in quite some time. Lots to talk about, and we obviously have to start with the trade between the Chicago Bulls and the Oklahoma City Thunder. Woj was the first to report it. It's just a straight-up swap. The Thunder are sending Josh Giddey to Chicago, and the Bulls are sending Alex Caruso to the Thunder. We'll try and break this down by team. I will start with, let's go with the Bulls here. This is disastrous for them. And I wrote a piece immediately after. It's up at Bleach Report. You go check it out. I'll probably step on the toes of much of what I said there. I don't necessarily take out the stick of dynamite too often. Like I try to approach things from a level-headed perspective. I eviscerated them because this is just a catastrophic example of asset mismanagement when you look at a team that we know reportedly had offers of multiple first round picks from multiple suitors at the trade deadline. And there was even, this is per Will Gottlieb of Chicago Sports, I believe recently reported that they could have had a top 10 pick in this year's draft. Now, you could break this down as, do you want a top 10 pick or Josh Giddey in like a Josh Giddey or top 10 pick in this draft when not a lot of people are high on this draft class? That's something to get into, but I think there's sort of three layers to this. Now, the idea of the Bulls trading Alex Caruso, that's actually good. It implies some semblance of foresight. Maybe they checked in and saw he wasn't going to sign a 4-year extension, which it's estimated we have to figure out what the league's average salary ends up being. But that could have been around 478, 480 was the number that I saw Woj throw out there. So I'm assuming he talks to Bobby Marks. Or they knew he wouldn't sign at that number, or that if he is willing to sign at that number, he didn't want it to be in Chicago. And so moving that player, who we all knew was not part of their long-term program if the Bulls are ever going to be great again, even though he is an all-world defender himself, moving that player is perfectly fine. I would argue that it's the right move, and it sort of hints at a level of foresight, of self-awareness that the Bulls have not typically shown. So I have no issue with moving Alex Caruso, nor with what it implies that the Bulls might be doing, but we will get to that. The actual return here, you have to look at it. Josh Giddey, he doesn't turn 22 until just before the start. I think it's August. He'll be 22 when next season tips off. You're getting younger here. And the Bulls said that they were looking to replace Lonzo Ball as part of this. I find that hysterical because Lonzo Ball hasn't played more than 2 years. And so now you're looking to replace him. And what efforts did you actually put into looking to replace him over the course of those 2 years? And between Lonzo's shooting, defense, and playmaking, Josh Giddey is going to replace exactly one of those things in the playmaking. I'm open to the idea, though, that Giddey can be much better than what we've seen in OKC, and he's had moments. This isn't to paint the picture of Josh Giddey sucks as a basketball player. You can get into, you have to have your own questions about the stuff that went on off the court. The issue here is you are acquiring someone who's about to be paid again and will probably, because of his age, be paid more than Alex Caruso. Now, if you think that Josh Giddey really has more to offer, because we saw that Jalen Williams, we saw that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander usurped him in kind of the featured, the ball handler pecking order. There's been talk that the Thunder want to expand Chet Holmgren's on-ball role next year. You do have Case and Wallace, so you probably want to develop a little bit more on ball because he can be a little, he can be too hesitant. He's just much better than Josh Giddey ever was on defense so far. So yes, he slid down the pecking order. You now go to a team that I guess is going to feature you prominently, but it becomes a mega issue in the sense that look at what you could have had. So 2 first-round picks at least, or a top 10 pick that would have been under cost control. You're now getting this player as you have to decide whether he's worth paying. And you might have to make that call before he's ever on the court. He's rookie extension eligible. You don't need to know his max salary. He's not getting it. I would imagine they make this wait until restricted free agency. So you kind of have a year to let this play out. But there are a number of things that could happen here. Either Josh Giddey underperforms and it doesn't cost a shit ton to keep him, in which case the trade's going to look like a dud, or he overperforms and you have to pay him a boatload of money at a time when you're still not good enough to justify just shelling out these massive deals. And I think the bigger issue for me here than the fact that they prioritized, well, and also if you want to be in a situation where you're prioritizing, forget about it being Josh Giddey. it could be another player. And most of the players that, like, unless you had the opportunity to get a caps lock cornerstone, or if you like to prioritize players over picks in this situation is bizarre to me. And so you look at if this was their version of the Raptors trade, is the example I brought up in my piece for Bleacher Report, the OG Anunoby trade, where they prioritized Emmanuel quickly, they got a second round pick and RJ Barrett, but they clearly prioritized the players over draft picks. There had more of a couple things going for them. Is one, that OG Anunoby was good enough. Like if Alex Caruso hits the open market, yeah, he'll have offers. He's not going to have a max offer this summer. OG Anunoby can probably get the max if he wants to. So if he had leverage to want to go to New York, where had they've gotten multiple picks from the Kings, let's say, maybe he was able to shut it down, or teams weren't willing to give that much if they couldn't guarantee he'd resign. There's still a level of risk there with Alex Caruso. It's just at a different scale because I love Alex Caruso, but he's Alex Caruso, where it's you have to ask the question, yeah, he might be one of the 5 best just overall defenders, most valuable defenders in the game, which you could also make the case for OG Anunoby. Can he play as many minutes? And again, you could get into OG Anunoby's not the perfect analog because he has a ton of injury issues, but with his size, like he could defend all 5 positions versus Alex Caruso is like a 3.75 defender. There are going to be some 4s he can't hold up against, but there are going to be some 4s that we saw him defend. He's defended LeBron James. He's defended Paolo Banchero, the whole 9. So my point being, though, is that when you were trading OG Anunoby for players, you were getting more of a certified asset in Emmanuel Quickley, who will cost a ton of money to retain. He's entering restricted free agency himself, but you already knew what he was. And you look at him and said, well, imagine what that guy could do in a more expansive role. Or look at how his skill set can scale to all these different versions of a team. Josh Giddey doesn't do that because of the shooting liability. He shot 34.7% on catch and shoot threes during the regular season. That's just not good enough. And he's gone through stretches where he can leverage his floater and where the threes are going in. They invariably kind of pull back. And that was in, mind you, a system that was almost exclusively 4 or 5 out, depending on, if Josh Giddey's on the floor, you're playing 5 out, but how much of a threat is he? We saw how defenses ended up treating him in the playoffs. The Maverick series specifically was not a good look on him. And we even saw before, this is long before the playoffs. If you didn't watch a ton of Thunder basketball, that's fine. But like head coach Mark Daigneault, like Josh Giddey's spot in their most important lineups has not been guaranteed for quite some time. Basically all of last season at the absolute minimum, basically. So you're getting this massive maybe, and you're bringing him into a situation where, yes, it'll look different, but as of now, you're not opening up the floor for him anymore. The Bulls were 26th in 3-point attempt rate, the share of their shots coming from beyond the arc, and they were 29th in 3-point percent. So you're bottom 5 in 3-point accuracy and volume. That's not going to open up the floor a ton for him. You have the personnel to maybe get out to utilize Josh Giddey in transition, but what is that going to look like when you're talking about the guys that are running out and how our defense is going to guard them? He's just not going to have the same level of operating room or even the same level of proven shot making around him. Again, to Josh Giddey's credit on the basketball floor, he has made adjustments and adaptations specifically over the past 2 seasons, but it was never enough to make you think that this is someone who is plug and play or someone who is more scalable. And so if you want to optimize him while also insulating him against his weaknesses, but optimizing his strengths, insulating his weaknesses, this roster almost demands a ton of turnover here. And so that gets it, but I'm not finished with my example, is if you're going to prioritize players in this trade specifically, and let's say that player was Josh Giddey, okay, I don't know which team could say that about one of their top, if the Wizards prioritize Josh Giddey in a Denny Avdia trade, I'd kill them too if they weren't getting first round picks. But you needed to have, but let's say you wanted to, you need to have somebody else, because as part of this rebuild that this might signal, which is technically a good thing, you need to have somebody else that is going to then help you get a first round bounty. The Bulls do not have that, assuming that they're not going to trade Coby White, which to acquire Josh Giddey and then trade Coby White would be fucking stupid. And I'm not saying they would do it. I mean, it's the Bulls, so I'm not saying they wouldn't do it either. But so you don't have DeMar DeRozan could just leave in free agency, or you sign and trade him for less than you would have probably gotten from him, and you trade him with time left on his contract, not even less necessarily at last year's deadline, but last offseason or the 2023 trade deadline. So, and Zach LaVine, his value is cratered. And if you want to look at, them trying to recoup assets elsewhere, they were trading Alex Caruso at or near the peak of his value. They will be trading Zach LaVine, and if they want to look to move Lonzo Ball's expiring, those will represent the nadir of their values. Just Lonzo hasn't played in more than 2 years. He's an expiring contract, so maybe that's value. Ditto for Vooch if you're trying to recoup stuff there. There are teams that could be interested in theory, but you also, it's just like, well, we don't really have a big man there. Maybe we get one in the draft, or we trade for another one, or we bring back Drummond. Vooch is slightly critical in theory to making Josh Giddey work, just because there could be a pick and pop, a perimeter 2-man game between the two. And they're just, Vooch is he's a pretty good floor navigator too. So having that kind of a smart big man where it's not just relying on his spacing, but also his IQ, that might be important to streamlining Josh Giddey. You don't have, though, the other player to go out and get enough assets to say, well, like, this is where our launching pad is from the rebuild. And the even bigger issue is, are we sure that's what this signals? Because teams that are going to rebuild, and by the way, if you wanted to go the Josh Giddey route too, the Raptors, what they also had was a number one type cornerstone in place, which, as I'm saying this, and I don't know that I realized this while I was writing it, when we did our our Atlantic division look ahead, go check it out. We didn't go into the Scotty Barnes extension eligibility, I don't think, for the Raptors. We have him, Grant and I both have him just penciled in for a 5-year max. I think the only thing to quibble over would be, does he get a player option? Does he not? So there's your Raptors analysis from this podcast, because we missed it in their offseason look ahead. Again, go check those out. 15 of 30 are done. We'd already recorded the Bulls and the Thunder, of course. So this is amending that. So you weren't in a situation where this is the package you get to prioritize and then sell it as a rebuild. So the fact that the Bulls now might turn around and rebuild, which I've seen fans point out and entertain, okay, that's great. This is still asset mismanagement of the highest level, and it's gross. It's grotesque that this organization keeps doing this. And also, are we sure that that's what they're doing? Or are we just, they have Andre Drummond, DeMar DeRozan are free agents. So is Patrick Williams is a restricted free agent. Are they out on those guys? And if they're not, so now you're in a situation where you're about to pay DeMar. Drummond will get a raise. They have early bird rights. It probably shouldn't be anything backbreaking. How much does Patrick Williams cost? The Bulls, they only took on about $1.5 million, but we'll say sub $2 million as part of this deal. They're now about $40 million away from the tax. That's before paying DeMar, before paying Patrick Williams, and before paying Andre Drummond. I'm not going to count. I don't care about the money that a tax payment could cost ownership. But like, we know that this team is not good enough. If you're going to go into the tax, the team should be better than what it's going to be on paper. And you could say, all right, they're going to save money as part of a Zach LaVine trade. Sure. But are you just, at that point, are you strictly dumping him for cap relief? That would come back to the point of, well, if you're not even going to get first round equity for Zach LaVine, like, how are you recouping some of this equity? It's okay. If the plan is to try and keep their pick top 10 protected, it's owed to San Antonio next year, and that they're going to tank and they're rebuilding, put yourself in a better starting point, especially when you're trading their most valuable trade asset aside from Kobe White. I would argue. Maybe Ayo Dosunmu gets more at this point relative to what the Bulls just accepted for him, but you're taking a distressed asset for someone who, yes, is basically a decade older, but is at the peak of his value and does more desirable things as guarding 1 through 4 and entering the first team all defense discussion every year. Are you concerned about how much he can play per game? Oh, sure. You concerned about his offensive volume? Sure. He did just shoot over 40% from 3 on career high volume. There can be some playmaking, especially in actual space. That's all stuff to talk about with the Thunder, so I don't want to spoil that too much. But you had the opportunity to put yourself in a better launching point for this rebuild. And the fact that you went with someone who's about to get paid, I question whether you're fully committed to entering said rebuild. And so the fact, if they're actually going to quote unquote start over, that doesn't excuse what they did, not only here, but turned down in the run leading up to that. And it's even worse. Look, you could say if this was the best offer now, okay, fine, and they had to take it, that just proves that they should have moved Alex Caruso already. If there were, I don't want to say better offers but if you deemed this a better offer than other packages that were on the table where you could have gotten multiple first round picks, that's even worse of a look, because now you've actively chosen this path of bottom of the middle. That's just what perpetually the Bulls seem to be addicted to. And this, to me, is an advancement of that, the line of thought behind it. I don't see a scenario where, even if Josh Giddey plays well, that I look back on this and think that it ends up being the right, he would have to turn into sort of a guiding force for your entire rebuild, which I just don't see happening. And then what does this do, by the way? When you're talking about the fit of the players that we know, like, his fit is horrendous with DeMar DeRozan. That is just A+, like, awful, like A negative awful. It's so, those two on the court, you really can't play them together, and you're not going to have the requisite shooters around them. I guess if Lonzo plays and Kobe White's playing, that's helpful. That was a lineup of Kobe White, Lonzo Ball, DeMar DeRozan, and Josh Giddey doing defensively at that point. I mean, insert whoever you want as kind of your fifth. So there, if you're bringing back certain players, this roster doesn't, and you're not moving others, Giddey's an even more horrendous fit. Now, if you're moving some things around, DeMar's not back, that'll be asset mismanagement if he leaves for nothing, by the way. Okay, that kind of thins out the pecking order a little bit. But part of what would appeal to this trade is, Kobe White can play off the ball. That's fine. Like this will work out. So your most promising player, this is how we're going to justify the trade for the Bulls, that their most promising player will now spend less time on the ball. And part of what made him special last year, yeah, there was progress as a passer, but there was real progress as an off the dribble shooter. You're going to dilute that element of his game. I just don't get it. And now you've traded for someone who will probably not be better or more valuable than him anyway, but I bet you he ends up commanding more in his next deal. If he doesn't and the contract's not damaging, I guess that changes the context of this trade a little bit. So we should wait and see. But if he's getting 3 years and $36 million, that doesn't say enough good things about his outlook for you to feel good. So the deal isn't backbreaking, but it's because Josh Giddey still is kind of not a super valuable basketball player, or is only super useful in certain situations. That's a disastrous outcome here as well. So I don't know necessarily what this is a precursor to, but it's nothing inspiring. And while that's par for the course, this is like unspectacular, even by their maddeningly, historically unremarkable standards, is where this comes in at. And you cannot frame this in a way that is going to make me like the trade or see the logic behind it. I even saw some people complaining like, well, now you can't use Alex Caruso to help grease the wheels of his Zach LaVine trade. That's the one thing I'll say is I don't really think that matters. I mean, one, if you have to grease the wheels of his Zach LaVine trade and you're not planning on being good anyway, I know you're trying to save money, but like, I'm just eating that. I'm not going to give a team a first round pick to take on Zach. I'm just not going to do it, because that implies, what do you need that flexibility for? Are you that cheap? Or are you looking to do something else that's mind meltingly dumb? And then also just Zach LaVine's making 43 plus million. You had Caruso's basically $10 million salary to that. Moving $50 plus million in salary is a lot in a deal. And so I don't know that they would come out of that looking rosy. So that might be the one thing I'll say is, this team, like, I don't think they worsened their chances of completing a Zach LaVine trade. Or again, I just wouldn't grease the wheels of a Zach LaVine trade. If you're not going to even just take him and send back expiring contracts at minimum, then they should just eat the Zach LaVine cost here. But now for the time being, we do have to see how this plays out. You have Zach LaVine, you have Lonzo Ball, you have Ayo Dosunmu, you have Kobe White, you have Josh Giddey. You could have DeMar DeRozan back, who's not a guard anymore, but he was just their best player and primary playmaker, who's best off on the ball, which is just like Giddey, who, yeah, he can shoot it better than Lamar's, sort of this standstill shooter. And look, even upped his volume in the playoffs, but someone shooting 35% during the regular season on spot up threes on fewer than 3 attempts per game, that's not going to move me to say that he is scalable to this situation. This is an absolutely horrendous trade for the Chicago Bulls, and it shows that they have learned absolutely nothing. They've not evolved as an organization, and I think the silver lining is this could signal that they're about to rebuild. Why in the actual fuck would you trust this organization to rebuild properly? This, again, is less about Josh Giddey, the player, and more about the logic that went into not just this deal, but the point that led up to it and what we now have to watch, wait, and look for in Chicago. And it's just, they're good for throwing curveballs, even by their standards. I thought they couldn't do anything that would absolutely shock me, but I thought, was it worse that you're telling teams that you want the godfather off for Alex Caruso, and then you settle for someone whose trade value relative to where he was drafted, relative to being on a rookie scale, relative to the theory of him, is just at its absolute rock bottom. And that is so mind-numbingly uninspiring that I feel bad for Bulls fans. They deserve better. They've been waiting for better. They're willing to go through these they're going through competitive troughs right now, but this is the same thing with the Knicks way back when, where they thought that their fans wouldn't sit through a rebuild. If you can sell a direction, a coherent, distinct, fully formed direction scaling forward, your fans will accept it. I promise you. the Bulls are more formless than before when you're just looking at their out. Like you just couldn't this all we say that, oh, does this signal that they're most like, isn't there a scenario where they don't, that DeMar DeRozan's back, that Andre Drummond is back, that Patrick Williams is back, and they're trying to do what at that point? Race to the 9 seed, to the 8 seed? It's a terrible trade for the Bulls. I gave them a D minus, and only because I still think Josh Giddey can have value. I just don't, especially as they're currently constructed, I don't see how the Bulls are gonna bring it out in him. They would not be the team that I would have thought could help reboot, rehab his on-court utility. And I will be prepared to eat crow if I am wrong. But even if I'm wrong about Josh Giddey, I still don't think the peak of his powers is enough to shift the Chicago Bulls' entire direction. And that's what they remain at this point, is they are directionless. They do not, if they have a vision, someone explain it to me, because they could have fooled me. This looks like visionless. It's just, look, it's dreck. It's complete and utter bullshit that they've been peddling for so long. I wrote it, shoveling down the throats of their fan base that just, they deserve better. And you should be frustrated as a Bulls fan. It seems like the Bulls fans in my mentions, a lot of them are frustrated too. Hopefully they hit on some of these other moves here, but they have not earned the benefit of the doubt. They're not going to get it from me, and they certainly should not get it from you. The other side of this trade is equally fascinating, but for many different reasons. I saw people ask whether Oklahoma City needs to be the title favorite after this move. I'm not putting them ahead of the Boston Celtics, but the fact that getting a 30-year-old Alex Caruso puts them in that conversation. I mean, they are just coming off finishing with the best regular season record in the seed in the Western Conference, so it's not a huge leap. But like, that's the level they were at, and this is encouraging for a few reasons. One, because of what I think it hints, forget about Caruso's fit for a minute, what it just sort of suggests about what the Thunder are prepared to do this offseason. We saw them get a little bit more aggressive by their fairly conservative standards, I would say. When they acquired Gordon Hayward, it just didn't pan out. But that was an opportunistic move. That was virtually no risk for them. It didn't cost them a ton of anything. They sent out guys that weren't part of their long-term program, even their immediate program, quite frankly. That hurts me to say, knowing who went out in that deal. What a shout out Poku. But the fact that they make this move, and yes, they ended up giving this is like kind of the move where even if you weren't being aggressive, it's, yeah, okay. Like, we did use a top 7 pick on this guy in 2021, but Alex Caruso is maybe one of the 5 best defenders in the game, 5 to 10 best defenders in the game, however you want to, even if he's one of the 15 best defenders in the game. You can't pass this up. But it shows that they're willing to, one, make moves and take some risk. Now, this isn't an organization that would acquire Caruso without any intel on his salary demands or whether he'd be interested in signing that extension I mentioned earlier. He'll have to wait 6 months to do it, to stay in Oklahoma City long term. But even if they were going into this blind, Oklahoma City was giving up no picks, and they have the depth, the talent, the flexibility to just kind of roll with it. And they're good enough to justify, well, look what this guy does for our defense and a little bit of our offense. But this suggests that they're going to continue to be even more aggressive this summer in addressing this. By the way, this does not address, I would argue, any of their biggest needs, but I still love it, is my point. And so before we get into kind of the fallout, where do the Thunder go from here? The fit of Alex Caruso is largely fantastic. Like I had already mentioned, he is not high volume on offense, and it's to the point where it can frustrate the hell out of you. But he did just shoot over 40% from 3 on a career high. I think it was 5.9 attempts per 36 minutes. That volume or per minute rate, that could come up in Oklahoma City with the types of looks that he'll probably be getting. Also, I think that you can coax more volume out of his driving game. He's pretty good when he gets inside the arc. He'll pick up his dribble before he gets inside the arc, and he'll dump it off, or he can throw a nice pass from a standstill. But when he gets moving, he will kind of maintain his dribble. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to have more unobstructed paths to the basket just by virtue of the level of shooting and spacing with which the Thunder play. That's massive for his offensive value. And even if he's the same exact player, he's someone right now who's going to generate more defensive attention without the ball than a Josh Giddey. That's just a fact. And so that is a win for your offense, even if you wanted a more dynamic, like an offensive player who could maybe put defenses in rotation from that dead stop. That's not something he's necessarily going to do. But now you're getting someone who just fits on. He's an easier fit on offense than Josh Giddey, even if you don't want him to run units on his own. The fact that now, though, Cason Wallace is kind of like his understudy, that should scare the shit out of 29 other teams. Casey Wallace is already a really good defender. I had him first team all rookie. No regrets for me there. The offense, he's Caruso-esque in the sense that he's so hesitant, but you kind of trust him to take the right shots where he's either going to, pass dribble, make a quick decision. Your quibble would be, could he be more aggressive in looking for his own shot beyond the arc or firing up those threes? Caruso's not going to teach him that, but just being the understudy to Caruso on defense. And now what you've done defensively, this is a team that was already, I think they were third in points allowed per possession last year. You have Chet Holmgren, you have J-Dub, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and of course, Lou Dort. All well above average defenders, especially last year. Shai was kind of a question mark leading into last season, maybe net neutral on some nights, a liability on others, it felt like. There are some people that made an all-defense case for him last year. I did not. But the fact that you could sit there and make one and I would listen to it, that's huge. And so you have those 4 high-caliber defenders. No, wait, Casey Wallace is still there. And you have the switchability of Kenrich Williams if he kind of has a renaissance next season. But so you have those 5, I would argue, again, based off last season specifically, we're talking about well above average defenders. And you have, I would say, 3 before Alex Caruso comes in, 3 all defense caliber defenders. Now you're adding Alex Caruso into the fold, who might be the best defender of them all. I think Chet Holmgren will have a case just because of what we know about rim protection, but also Lou Dort, of course, has a case. But now all of a sudden it's just debatable, but he's going to come in. He makes everyone's job so much easier. Chet Holmgren can take more risks on the back line or floating around the perimeter. Lou Dort maybe just doesn't have to spend as much time on the absolute toughest covers, or if he still does, now if him and Alex Caruso are playing together, or even if they're not, when you're going to stagger their minutes, now Alex Caruso takes the best guy, and that makes J-Dub's job a lot easier. It makes Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's job a lot easier. It makes Casey Wallace's job a lot easier here. And so what you've essentially done is you've increased the ceiling of your defense by diminishing the importance, basically, of any singular player on your roster in the best possible way, to where like there just might be nice. If you're going to play Caruso and Dort together, like Dort's job could get easier. He might be the only one that could be spared most of the benefits, because I think that they'll look to stagger his minutes, in part because it frees Caruso. Just there's so few guys in the league that if they're healthy, you could say 1 through 4 best players, doesn't matter what they're doing, and just go get it. I mean, like, yeah, you don't want Caruso necessarily. He's not Drew Holiday when you're going to put him in the post. But if you're talking about somebody who attacks from the outside in, he is suffocating at basically all of those spots. And to get him now, for the cost that they did for what it was a distressed asset in Josh Giddey, someone who was coming off the bench, not playing in crunch time by the end of just again, on and off all season, just not a crunch time staple. And I think what you could say is, okay, well, the Thunder still have needs here. So let's just get into that. One, if they're going to keep Caruso long term, by the way, this is also someone you acquire where if he signs that extension, again, we're all working with estimates, but let's say he ends up with 4 years, 78, 4 years, 80. That's a contract that's going to age, even as he gets into his, early to mid, goes through his early 30s into his mid 30s. His next deal, I think it'll take him to his age 31, 32, 33, 34 seasons. If it's a 4-year contract, fuck yeah, that's fine. His game should age fairly well. It's not like he shoulders a heavy lift on offense, especially for this team, but you're getting someone like that to where just because of what Giddey can do as a passer and his youth, so you're still betting on the upside. I will be shocked if he ends up, again, if he gets less than $20 million a year in his extension. One, I think something has gone terrible, or his restricted free agency contract. I would say something has gone terribly wrong for him in Chicago. So you get someone who's cheaper and an easier fit at a time when, okay, we have to start planning around the rookie scale maxes for J-Dub and Chet Holmgren. And then you're going to have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on his supermax soon. So like that's a good piece of business where it's okay. Everyone wanted them to acquire an expensive player and they still can. We're about to get into that, I promise. But this is someone who fits more snugly into your long-term salary structure. And now he opens up more possibilities for you. Let's get into that. Is Oklahoma City takes on less than $2 million in this trade. Excuse me, the Bulls had shed money. I said that they took on money. I apologize for that. But Oklahoma City takes on less than $2 million in this trade. They still have more. They could have less depending on what they want to do, but they're project to have more than $30 million in cap space still. It's actually over $33 million. I think the 2 players that could redefine that is the team options on Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe. Do the Thunder want to give those guys an immediate bump? They could renegotiate and extend. They could decline the team options and resign them. I would consider that with Isaiah Joe based off your uses for other cap space. But this costs you no first-round picks. So your best offers of just cap relief and picks, and you do have some tangible players if teams are interested in Aaron Wiggins. When you have Casey Wallace and Alex Caruso and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, yeah, that's someone you could send out as a sweetener. That's not making so they have the balance of they can offer cap relief. They can offer actual players. Ousmane Dieng is still my guy. I can believe in him. There'll be teams that have a lot of interest in Kenrich Williams or even big J. Will. That's like they still have those non-core prospects that no, they can't anchor trades on their own. Maybe Case and Wallace could, but I don't know why you want to move him or be willing to move him. It would depend on the return, obviously. But they have those players. They have all these picks, and they still have all this cap space. Maybe they use it in free agency, but maybe they look to address stuff on a trade. And what Caruso specifically does, and I've seen some people bandy this about already, is well, couldn't he in theory make Lou Dort expendable? To where if you wanted to include Lou Dort in a trade for a higher end player, you have Alex Caruso soak up those minutes. Maybe he ends up making about the same as Lou Dort moving forward, who continues to be on just one of the better contracts in the NBA. He's still under team control through when does his contract end? So next year he's at 16.5 million, and then he has another 2 guaranteed years after that. So through 2026, 2027, and we're talking about someone who will never make $18 million a year over that time. That's a really good deal. I wouldn't actively look to move off him. I don't, he's younger. I think it feels like Lou Dort has been around for 80 years for some reason. But then you look and it's okay, well, this barely 20, he just turned 25, basically. I mean, wow. So to have him on that contract, but if it's for the right player, if you're saying giving up Lou Dort gets you Mikal Bridges, if it got you Lauri Markkanen, should the Jazz be willing to move him? Yeah. Now it's easier to now say, well, yeah, we'd be willing to include Lou Dort. I don't think that's just the main point of this trade. I honestly think it wouldn't shock me if this isn't the meat and potatoes of their offseason. If this was just a way for them to reorient the roster because of a guy who they had draft equity invested in was sort of just higher profile because of his draft stock. So they're recalibrating, but it was also just a matter of pure opportunism where you just look at the level of player that Josh Giddey is, how he fits with this roster and where the Thunder are at in their competitive window versus what Alex Caruso is, how he fits into both their roster and their competitive window. And it becomes a no-brainer. I don't know if you don't go out there and maybe again, if they had plans to move Lou Dort, this becomes a priority, but I can't imagine based off what we want to see from them, that more dynamic player who could put defenses in rotation on the ball. They could use some more just, I guess, girth up front, but you don't want to do it to the point where Chet Holmgren is playing so many minutes as the second big. So like those were the top two needs for them. And you could also look at, well, do you want like a different type of a shooter where, okay, Isaiah Joe is great and he works his ass off defensively, but could we maybe get somebody who's going to be better, stronger defensively? Now that player is just, those are hard to find. Every team wants them, and the Thunder already have a couple of them, to be honest with you. Well, they have J-Dub, who can operate on ball, and he's not like this super off-ball, high-volume three-point shooter, but you get my point. The players who don't compromise your spacing or your three-point volume or your defense, those types. This just seems like a matter of just pure golden opportunity for them, which is perfectly fine. But now you're scaling ahead of the rest of their offseason, and the same doors that were open before, they're all still open now. And yeah, except for the fact that you're probably less likely to, one of the names that I've seen kind of bandied about was to go after a Colin Sexton from Utah. It would have been fine fit before, but I just higher volume offensively. But now with Case and Wallace, Shea, J-Dub, and Alex Caruso, it just doesn't make sense. And even that trade, if you would have kept Giddey, I wouldn't have been a fan of it there. Do you look at someone who gives you maybe a little bit more ball handling or strength or rebounding than Alex Caruso would, but is still a perimeter player? Denny Abdi is a name I've mentioned for, to be fair, pretty much every team. There will be people that still like John Collins here, or love John Collins here. I think I could see it, and that'd be another. Well, what did you give up to get that? I'd like if you're giving up a first round pick for John Collins, I'd be absolutely shocked. So you could address it that way and view it as more of a stopgap. After next season, he'll be expiring. That's another trade anchor they could roll over. But again, just the fact that this is Alex Caruso and how good he is, it does make me think a little bit like, are they going to aim bigger? Will they try to coax teams into trading players who aren't necessarily available? And that matters more than even identifying these certain names. Should they be a Nick Claxton, or does this make it more or less likely they go after Isaiah Hartenstein? Honestly, I don't know. It doesn't have to impact any of those pursuits because they still have all their cap space. I will still quibble over how aggressive and how they should be in chasing another big and how much equity they should be prepared to give up to get one, whether we're talking about draft picks and players or just actual cap space. I think I'd ultimately be fine with Isaiah Hartenstein because his best role might be playing fewer minutes than he did at points for the Knicks last year. I don't know how you necessarily sell him on. Keep your role a little bit more finite. Just because you don't want to see like Chet as the primary big just works, and it's so intriguing that you don't want to even like how much do you want to really diminish those minutes by? If it's 15 minutes a game, you want to just slice that and say, okay, the rest of Chet's, 10 to 20 minutes a game. Well, not 10, but like 20 minutes a game, 15 to 20 minutes a game. He'll play with another big, and then the other 15 to 20, he won't. That's probably like fine for assuming he plays, let's say like 30 to 35 minutes, just split that in half or skew a little bit more towards the 5 out. Okay. And I mean, Isaiah Hartenstein is fairly young. I don't hate Nick Claxton here either, just because he's always going to have 4 shooters around him at any given point. But they can do anything now. And I think what this does not more than anything, but what this really does is it kind of proves that OKC is acting like the contender that it actually is. Like I think part of that might be the framing of, well, is this a little bit risky because of what's going on with Caruso? He's not a restricted free agent like Josh Giddey would have been. Again, I mentioned, I don't think the Thunder are going in blind, but they're good enough to withstand the risk. And the fact that that's technically on the table, that does imply they're going to act like a contender as well. And I would argue, I mean, I wouldn't, this is just a fact. Approaching the offseason in that way is earned. I would argue that it's probably overdue, even when you're looking back to what they did at the deadline. And it's kind of a departure from their usual mode of operation. And that should utterly terrify the rest of the time. It's a scare the living hell out of them because they're not. I know people like to mention the bigger names, Larry Markin and Mikal Bridges with them. Should they try to open up more cap space and go after OG Anunoby if he's really unhappy with the Knicks' offer? They don't need that level of player to win the championship next year. There is a chance. I don't know that I would predict it. I want to let the rest of the offseason play out. There's a chance that the Thunder do nothing else other than use the number 12 pick, and they could win the title next year. That might have been possible even with Josh Giddey. It is now more likely without Josh Giddey and the fact that you're bringing Caruso in. And so if you want to go check out more targets, we went into a bunch, I believe, for the Thunder when we did their look ahead. A lot of the stuff we said is already germane, but this is a hell of a trade by the Thunder, and it was a matter of a great opportunity. But I think what it proves about what they're willing to do at this point, it just reinforces that they understand, that Sam Presti's not going to be talking about they'd borrow wins from their future anymore. I understand that we all think they had reached that point. There was still a question of how aggressive they were going to be. This makes me more excited and intrigued for their offseason and their future, quite frankly, than I was before, which was pretty fucking hard to do because if you go back, I'm not right about a lot of things, but like I've been pretty in on the Thunder before they were even this version of the Thunder. And I defended what they did at the trade deadline. It's like you have to show me the opportunity they passed on for me to just be mad that, people coming out of that Mavericks series talking about Daniel Gafford would have been the difference. Like it might have made the Mavs better in that series because that was not the series for him. So if you're passing on that, it's different. They are setting themselves up for higher end opportunities like this. And they're never, even when you think they might be biding their time a little bit too long, Josh Giddey being a perfect example, clearly they're not. Whether it's they played this perfectly or they're just taking advantage of a shit show of an organization in Chicago, it works out for them. It's not by accident that this happens so many times. So they're not the team to watch just because there's whatever the fuck is going on in Philly, and there are teams that could get more chaotic. There's just so much different avenues for them to explore. And I think so much I thought about their cap space, maybe going after a guy like John Collins and capitalizing that route where you're not giving up a ton of assets. And again, I know they didn't give up a ton of assets here. I think maybe more than anything, this is a harbinger of what they're willing to do on the trade market. Not like, because when it's cap space, even when it's a Thunder, you kind of understand, right? It's just cap space. We can move off it later. We create more later. We're getting these players for nothing. Like in most cases, they're not going to be a sign and trade. But now the fact that they made a move of this caliber, where it probably took a little bit of an iron stomach to get off Giddey. This team, it's set up really well. And the fact that I'm saying this and they didn't even address what I would view as one of their 2 biggest needs with this trade. I guess if you considered one of their biggest needs, which I would agree with, getting rid of Josh Giddey for someone who's just a better fit. So you checked one of your top 3 needs, but I would argue 2 that were a little bit more pressing, at least in my view. And yet I'm still sitting here and all I can do is sing their praises. Couple news items to catch up on, 3. So we'll start with, let's go with Malik Monk, who is agreeing to re-sign on that 4-year, $78 million early bird rights deal with the Kings. Can't become official until the July 6 when the moratorium is lifted, but he's going back to Sacramento. That is, I don't know, we didn't record the Kings outlook yet, actually. So my point was going to be when we were talking about Malik Monk, I didn't see the team. I know that he, in theory, maybe could have worked in Detroit, could have been plan D, E, F, G, whatever for Philly. Orlando was a team that was mentioned a ton. I still didn't really see the team that was going to go out and give him $20 million a year over a 4-year span. It's like that's what the Kings basically comes out to so close to that on the average. I would have predicted he went back to the Kings. And also, what this does for you as a Kings fan, by the way, one, it gets you back a player who was incredibly valuable. And having that injury, I think it was a knee injury to end the season, that really hurt their chances of getting into the playoffs. But just Kevin Huerter was dealing with stuff as well. But this is just his playmaking. There's a lot of stuff he does, but his playmaking going downhill might still be one of the more understated gems in the league. He finished, I think he was 18th in total drives this year, but second in assists on drives, behind only Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So he's someone who can also play off the ball, isn't going to compromise your spacing. He can run your point. He can run your offense, just not to the degree, again, that if I know Philly didn't need this, but not to the degree that Orlando, let's say, if you're looking for a lead guard, I don't view him as that. He's a starting caliber guard, and he can definitely do a lot of work on the ball. And if you're looking for him to run your offense in, second unit situations, I still think he needs more of a buffer, whether it's having that big who might be running handoff stuffs or can facilitate from the post, or if he's going to play alongside just another lead playmaker. I think this is a great deal for the Kings. The other thing it does for them too, the pathway to getting him was always a little bit fraught. They were suddenly mentioned in the Zach LaVine trade sweepstakes again. And while I get, especially if you're losing Malik Monk, the idea of wanting another dynamic creator and a more dynamic shooter than Malik Monk is, just the money to get there just to match his salary. So it's, okay, you're not going to have to give up assets. So I guess from just a pure talent play, I get it. But just immediately, it's Harrison Barnes gone, Kevin Huerter gone. Like that's just how you're getting to the start of Zach LaVine's number, by the way. That would have been $34 million. He's on a $43 million salary. So would you what else? Like Trey Lyles' money is sitting there if you wanted to go almost dollar for dollar. We know Sasha Vezenkov's not happy there, so that could have been money they threw in. But so you have been rolling that into LaVine and then creating, you're losing. Barnes is not the initial Barnes who came to the Kings, but he's logging minutes at forward spots. Kevin Huerter is someone that you can play and has played up to the 3, and hopefully his shooting will rebound following the shoulder injury. To me, you still consolidated and veered way too much toward the guard spots. And now I would assume, maybe I'm wrong, that they will not be mentioned in the Zach LaVine sweepstakes anymore. So you can focus on going after, maybe it's a different frontline partner for Domas Sabonis, or just continuing to target, I would just call them two-way wings. And you have 2 of them in Keegan Murray. That's absolutely what he is now. The strides he made, forget about what he did on offense. The strides he made defensively, just not something I ever would have. I'm not even talking that I was looking at him coming out of the draft. It's like, even after watching him as a rookie and having those moments, I wouldn't have projected him to be able to handle the level of assignments that he did. It was out of necessity, I think, more than maybe the Kings believed in him, but I do think it was kind of more born from necessity that they were trying him out in those situations. It worked out. And so to have him, to also have the emergence of Keon Ellis, that's a really good starting point. And they would have been a fun Alex Caruso team, even with Malik Monk coming back. They can now shift their focus, though, to filling those spots. And, you get to a point where you're putting Malik Monk he's at $17.4 million this coming season. What that does, they're basically over the cap with that money when you're entering they're basically over the tax line if you're penciling Malik Monk in there. There's things they could do to duck it a little bit, but you need to fill out your roster. You would have to dump, I guess, if you wanted to dump Vezenkov, or if you want to dump Chris Duarte, if you want to dump Davion Mitchell. So you could dump these they're not middle tier. They're not bottom of the barrel, but they're in between. They're not minimums, but they're worth a little bit more. So you could give yourself wiggle room under the tax. I'm sure there are teams. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know about Chris Duarte. Would someone just take him into cap space? I guess you're including seconds there. I think a team would definitely take a shot on Davion Mitchell's defense. The Kings might not want to punt on that just yet either. And then I don't know about Vezenkov. That might be something just because teams haven't seen enough of him. You could also go the nuclear route. Well, could we trade Kevin Huerter for an even cheaper player? There are avenues open, I'm saying, if they want to duck the tax. I think this team can envision itself being good enough to where they continue to be aggressive. But as of right now, like that would impact. They don't have enough wiggle room beneath the first apron. So let's even forget about the tax. If you want to use the full mid-level exception, 12.9 million, you're gonna have to jettison some salaries. If you're okay with the mini mid level, which is worth a little over 5 million, I don't know what type of a difference maker you're going to get. This is all to say any move they make is kind of going to be that I think meaningful move from here on is kind of going to be happening via trade. And I don't know if they have the asset firepower to get in on the theoretical Mikal Bridges sweepstakes insofar as those exist. Could they get in on we don't know if Denny Avdi is available, but is that someone else that they could go after? This is something I think on my outline, I should have brought it up to where we're going to do the Kings offseason look ahead. So there'll be more targets in that when we get to it. But to open more doors, if you on free agency, you would have to dump more salary. But I think right now, this was probably the singular most important part of their offseason because you have a higher ceiling, even in a tougher Western Conference next year, just by making no changes and ensuring that Malik Monk is there and he's healthy. And so to keep him on the early bird rights deal, again, I don't know who else would have actively matched this deal. I don't personally for the Kings, I'm an advocate of it because of who they already have in place. For a team like Orlando, if it was 4 and 78, I would like it less for them, but I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't love it for Philly, quite frankly, with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid there. But I wouldn't hate it either. This is the type of deal that no matter what team gave it, you wouldn't hate, but I like it more for the Kings because of, I guess, that entrenched importance to what they're doing. And so I'm fascinated by their offseason as well to see how aggressive they will be on the trade market. They do have this year's first round pick, which I don't know if that helps or complicates their offerings because do you prefer getting number 30 as just a team in a vacuum? Do you want number 13 in this draft or would you have preferred being able to get a 2025 first, which is technically headed to Atlanta with top 12 protection, I believe, and then it shifts to the top 10. So I probably would prefer to have opened up that pick from Sacramento, but you still can trade multiple first swaps. You have the salary matching to go out and do some pretty spicy things if they emerge. I don't know. Again, I don't know who that. I mean, I can cite players that I would love to have on this team. Denny Avdi would be absolutely fantastic for the Kings. Be fantastic for a lot of teams. But even just like adding I'm contractually obligated to mention this, like adding a Najee Marshall, if you're able to open up the non-taxpayer mid-level and give him that money, that's an addition that goes a long way for this team. I really think, I understand one, progress isn't linear, so we shouldn't look at the way last season ended as sort of this massive red flag. But the emergences defensively, specifically of Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis, they really just opened up a bunch of different doors for this team to, I guess, where if you wanted to kind of replace the Herter Barnes minutes with not Zach LaVine, but someone who's going to break down, who can shoot, and maybe he's more willing to try stuff off the ball, but can shoot and then dribble, like break down defenses off the dribble, who's just bigger than Malik Monk. If you wanted to go that route, I maybe Ellis and Keegan Murray have opened up the doors. Ideally, you'd still want to bring in another top line defender for me, but you have to, the market's going to dictate who's actively available to you there. So I really think that is kind of something that's been underplayed. Is like we all want the Kings to be aggressive just because they're good. And the way last season ended, it does leave this weird taste in your mouth. But I do think that they have more pathways to getting substantially better without going a nuclear route because of two things. Now you have Malik Monk back, so you just know that's happening. And the defensive emergence of Keon Ellis and Keegan Murray specifically for them there. Have two other news notes to get to. The Lakers have hired JJ Redick. I don't really know what to add to the discussion at this point that we haven't already said. It's a very interesting move. 4-year deal. I have not seen any reporting on what the actual numbers are. They went up to 6 years and what was it, 70 million for Dan Hurley? I would imagine he's not getting the same average annual rate. You could say that this shout out to Anthony Irwin, who's been on top of this all along, even when people were trolling him because of what happened with Dan Hurley. And I look, I'm going to be honest, I don't even fully understand what happened with Dan Hurley. That to offer that, first of all, I'm not saying you should have given him more as someone who has improved himself in the NBA, but if you're going to target a college coach like that, be damn well sure that this, it's like someone proposing marriage and not being sure whether the answer is yes. Like you don't do what the Lakers did without knowing what the answer is going to be, especially letting it unfold that publicly. And even if it was Dan Hurley kind of driving the exposure there for leverage with UConn or just his future, the Lakers front office has been in the business, especially Rob Blake as a former agent, long enough to know that that's how this works. That was a mega miss on their part. I'm fascinated to see what JJ Redick does. And it comes down to the jokes too. Just he hosted a podcast with LeBron James, and now he's LeBron James's head coach. They've just hired another head coach who doesn't have previous NBA head coaching experience. JJ Redick, I'm sure he's worked with players, does not have any coaching experience at the NBA level. But based off what he has said on his podcast, what we've heard him on broadcasts, I'm intrigued to see what his basketball philosophy is. I find myself more like we just have to wait and see. I don't want anyone to tell me why this is going to be a good move. You need to show me the track record of JJ Redick coaching and tell me why it's going to be a good move to guarantee it. It could be a great move. It could be a terrible move. I'm more fascinated by just like the spin on this. The degree to which Max Christie was mentioned when the Lakers were looking for a new head coach is just so ridiculously uncomfortable to the point where I'm not sure what they were trying to accomplish. Okay, yeah, he's 21 and they're probably going to re-sign him. He's a restricted free agent, but like the reporting that kept coming in Woj's pieces was they wanted a coach not only that could work with Anthony Davis and LeBron James, but they needed to prioritize the development of 26-year-old Austin Reeves, 26-year-old Rui Hachimura, and fucking Max Christie. That's just like one of the most egregious spins, especially on a recurring basis in NBA history, that is just funny. We're like they're not necessarily done getting better, but like they're 26. They're on their second deals already. Like they're veterans. Like if you want to factor them into why you want a certain coach, but are you looking at Rui Hachimura or Austin Reeves or Max Christie and saying like, yeah, like that's our version of like this person's going to come out of nowhere and maybe almost make an all-star. Like you're not looking at those and thinking they're even, I don't even want to say, like, let's look at Larry Markkinen. Do you look at these guys and say they have that type of a leap? Like Rui Hachimura has the Larry Markkinen leap in him, or he's going to go from solid rotation player who's, kind of wax and wanes depending on the season and the matchup. And now he's just in the all-NBA conversation. I guess if JJ Redick comes in and does that, I hope he wins Coach of the Year. I found that spin fascinating. I found Clutch Sports Group, specifically Rich Paul, trying to put distance between LeBron and the decision, fucking hysterical. And what was the quote he had said where it was basically like, if we were trying to exert leverage over the Lakers, we would tell them to draft Bronny James at 17. And my first thought was just like, the fact that that's even on your mind, you can't tell me that you have not tried to like leverage the Lakers into doing something specific. I'm not saying LeBron drove this decision. And do you know what? I don't care if he did. He's LeBron James. Like that's what makes also the spin super hysterical is that you have LeBron James going to his age 40 season, and we're harping on the fact that like, man, Max Christie really figure out this dude is. We need someone who can get in here and you have age 40 LeBron James. I'm not saying that the future shouldn't be part of the equation, that Anthony Davis shouldn't have a say. You don't need to frame it. LeBron is, to me, he's the best, greatest player in NBA history. He was no worse than the second greatest player in NBA history. Still playing, mind you, at an all NBA level. It's okay to say like LeBron helped with this decision. I know the optics are pretty poor because people went after LeBron for the Westbrook trade, as they should have, but that's still in the front office to make the call. Like it ultimately should just come down to like LeBron supported it. Maybe he even advocated for it, but this was ultimately the Lakers' decision because of X. They have Anthony Davis. They have Max Christie, their franchise cornerstone in the post-LeBron era, apparently, to say that they were trying to think long-term because LeBron is technically a free agent. He's also entering his age 40. Like this doesn't have to be that hard. I don't care who like the water's being carried on behalf. Is it Clutch? I know Woj has repaired the relationship with them, just trying to reinforce to like put distance between LeBron and the decision. Is it not the decision from 2011, folks? The decision from 2010, whatever it was, the decision of the head coaching hire. Like if it's the organization trying to do that on his behalf, that's like, it's just funny, that framing to me. But the Rich Paul saying that if we really wanted to like exert a leverage, it wouldn't be trying to get Bronny James in the 50s. It'd be getting him at number 17. Fact that you thought about that, the fact that you thought about that, I'll say it again. The fact that you thought about that makes like you're kind of proving everyone's point for them. So I'm not saying that's the edict they've issued to the Lakers or that there was a mandate for them to hire JJ Redick, but man, you talk about doing the opposite of what you set out to do in that situation. I think the ridiculousness, whoever is trying to do it this way, of including just Rui Hachimura, Max Christie, it's not, again, I don't think anything gets them as players. I'm super intrigued if Max Christie could get rotation minutes with someone in Redick who I can assume, but again, I'm not going to because I don't know what his coaching philosophy is going to translate to on the court. I do envision the Lakers just having more offensive creativity and movement away from the ball. Max Christie intrigues me there. He's not the reason that I'm hiring any head coach, and that should not shock or surprise anybody. So this will be interesting to see how it plays out. They now have a coach. They can go about the rest of their offseason. The next biggest thing to tackle is, before you get into, are they going to trade for Trae Young? It's, what's LeBron doing? Is he opting out and getting a deal that has a no trade clause? Is he just opting in? Could he actually leave? I think he'll just be back. That's not really, it's more fascinating to me to see what D'Angelo Russell does with his player option. I expect him to opt out. That's been the reporting, and he'll look for either a bigger number or maybe a deal that could be slightly less. Maybe it declines, but it's going out over more years and guaranteeing him more money. That impacts what they could do via trades, though, because then you're not moving him. And the salary filler in a big trade would become, one of them would be Rui Hachimura or Austin Reeves, two players who really dictated how the Lakers went about their head coaching search, apparently. So I'm more open to this idea than I think some people, because I've kind of come around. The skipping the line stuff to me it's a tough conversation to have, and I'll absolutely listen to it. But I am a big advocate of, and I know this is different, I'm just a big advocate of, we tell people there's no set path to getting somewhere. So I don't necessarily need to believe that these head coaches need to follow a set path to get there. Now, did JJ Redick's status or relationship with LeBron James bring him to a front of a line that should have included others, maybe a more expansive search, and there are still worthy people looking for their first opportunity? Apparently the Lakers were willing to give a first opportunity, because two of the three head coaches that they predominantly targeted in Dan Hurley and JJ Redick have not been NBA coaches before. Again, it's a discussion. And I think they're probably just, it comes down to there are only 30 jobs in this league. And I think that there are probably more than 30 deserving head coaches out there, people who've paid their dues for X amount of time. We definitely need to see a female head coach at a certain point. And I think we will, but it's just, it should get to, it'll happen. And they didn't interview, as far as I know, like we didn't see the usual kind of names and suspects linked to that. And it is a nuanced discussion. I won't say that I'm the perfect person to have it, especially fucking alone right here. Like there's no one who could push back against me. I'm willing to have it. I didn't view this as just some sort of, I didn't view it as immoral in any way, I should say. And that's, I'm open-minded to how he will fare as a head coach. And I would have given the same benefit of the doubt to any first-time head coach, at least from my perspective. There's other people who won't. Again, that's definitely a further discussion we have to have. The other piece of news here would be that the Detroit Pistons we mentioned that they dismissed Monty Williams. All jokes, by the way, with the Monty Williams title. I didn't realize his second wife had cancer now. He's had a tough go of it off the court. I hope everything's well with his family. Doesn't seem like his heart was in it at the beginning. I actually kind of think at this point they kind of should have just let him coach out next season. There's value in saying, if this isn't the head coach that Trajan Langdon wants, like he was already there, but what, you're now you're shoehorning. I don't think the next coach will have a problem, but you're shoehorning Fred Vinson onto their staff. I can't imagine that's an issue, but I could see it both ways. I probably would just kept him to see, and then you can make that, you're not what are you doing next year? Whose development did he ruin? He gave Killian Hayes a chance. Do you think that Jaden Ivey broke under him and you're so invested in him? Okay. I don't think it was the wrong decision. Framing his ownership's decision, it's you could be skeptical, because if Tom Gores drove that bus the first time and it didn't pan out, and he's driving it again, but the head coaching, the timing of it was just terrible. You had candidates coming off the board, and now they are linked to, that's the news, they'll be interviewing Dallas assistant Sean Sweeney. If he doesn't get the gig, I'm assuming it'll come with a nice little raise, because he's very close with Luka Doncic, loves him. And that, are we gaming this? Is Detroit thinking 8 steps ahead around Luka Doncic's next contract? We're going to hire Sean Sweeney. I will absolutely have that take if they end up settling on him. I believe they also are going to interview JB Bickerstaff, and they received permission to get Mike Inori from Minnesota, who I think he might have always been, he's known, he's a sicko throughout basketball circles. But I think that the job he did in Chris Finch's stead, and just him elevating, becoming more front facing during that time, it probably helped him in these sorts of discussions. I think we'll see more names. This is a situation where you look at the point they're at in their competitive window and development and their rebuild, that we'll see a bunch more names linked to them. I don't know if they've been linked to James Borrego. I guess I haven't been monitoring that closely, but he's been most closely tied to the Cleveland Cavaliers. So that is something to monitor. That'd be an interesting question as to which job you would prefer, because there might be a level of job security in Detroit that you don't have in Cleveland because of the expectations and the looming threat of, will Donovan Mitchell sign the extension? And even if he does, is this just sort of a what if we fail next year? And if he signs the extension, is Darius Garland going to request out? And at what point do we have to look at moving Jared Allen once we're paying Evan Mobley max money? In Detroit, Cleveland's roster is better. They're going to be way better next season. But like in Detroit, you have some job security. It's like, all right, this thing is 3 to 5 years from turning around. You could, if you take the Detroit job, my guess would be that you have at least 3 years of job security. You certainly cannot say that about taking the Lakers gig as JJ Redick. And you cannot say that with the Cleveland gig. So I'll be fascinated to see I'm fascinated by everything, but I want to see who Detroit ends up choosing. This is the silly season. There might be more solo podcasts because I don't want to waste, especially when I'm not going to waste. I thought about bringing on a guest, which is why this isn't releasing earlier, but then it was just kind of like, I don't want to waste emergency pods that aren't even good. They're not going to age that well because other shit's going to happen that you guys care about. I don't want to waste guest appearances on something that's I view. I sometimes forget that I'm in this silo and join our Discord. You could be in that silo too of basketball sickoism because it's my full-time job, but also because of being exposed to our Discord members, all the fantastic people that listen to this podcast and comment on YouTube. That like Alex Caruso, one, it fucked up my night because like I'm working on something else. I have to pivot to this and you have to do all this other stuff. That's being an adult, apparently, as I cover a game about guys making millions of dollars to put a ball through a tiny hoop. And I love it. It can be stressful at points, but this is like the trade where it's for like the people who really follow this content, they're going to love it. But there are probably people that are just like, oh, like that like bald dude in his 30s who is like kind of not really a point guard. He got traded to Oklahoma City for someone who wasn't really playing for them when it mattered most. So you're looking at that. I looked at that level of trade, and it was just like, where does this fall on the if you're rating them on just the? It doesn't warrant an emergency podcast if you don't cover the team, you cover the entire NBA. And look, it was big enough to fuck up my evening, but I also it's funny to think about it in terms of there are probably people who just don't view it in the like avid basketball fans who are kind of just like, all right, like let's move on. What's happening with Trae Young and what's happening with Donovan Mitchell? But that'll do it. Went stuck to almost under an hour. So this is a short podcast. I guess I should apologize since we normally go for at least 80 minutes. But please remember, if you've made it this far and you've not already subscribed to us, I know this is the time of year where we get more of an audience because people do tend to appreciate the stuff that we do around these transactions and when content's probably sparse, but because we do such a great job covering the entire league, consider sticking around or recommending us to your friends, sharing the content on Twitter, linking them to it like on YouTube or sending them the podcast link, bumping us on Twitter, shouting us out on Twitter goes a long way toward building the community, helping us get more subscribers. Subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth recommendations are huge at this point, though. As our go to the YouTube comments, flood them with positivity or takes. Maybe we need to start doing like a crowd poll at the beginning of every episode so that you can respond to it in Discord. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description, but also on YouTube. Flood the comments of our shorts too, which are just like only negative comments. I mean, Rome, I see Rome in there is always throwing out some fun ones and positive ones every once in a while, but go flood our comments with positivity. It doesn't have to be about us. Tell us about a win that you had in life. Help the algorithm love us back, but also just let's spread some positivity and continue to build the podcast. You can find our Twitter handles in the YouTube and podcast descriptions, but I will just echo any word of mouth recommendations or shout outs that you can give us and alert us to them. Show us. If you've helped someone subscribe to this podcast, fucking tell us. I will give you a metaphorical pat on the back, or maybe I'll even send you, if you tell me that you converted someone to being a Hardwood Knocks listener. If you tell me in the YouTube comments, in my DMs, in Discord, how you found us, I will send you, we've got Hardwood Knocks magnets. I will mail them to you. Or we have some stickers, but I'm running low on them. I'll send you, I just want to hear, how did you find us? But I appreciate everything I want to use. Thanks for all the support as always. Shout out to the one, the only, the king, the person whose Instagram hype videos you can believe, even in an empty gym, unlike Ben Simmons, the one and only Frank Nila.